Salesforce is massive. Many companies use it. So being able to combine it with an orchestrator to orchestrate data can be super useful. In Kestra 0.23, we have just added an official Salesforce plugin. So now you can create, read, update and delete records inside of your Salesforce instance. Here I've got an example where I'm going to create 2 contacts inside of Salesforce. As you can see here, I can specify my username and password. Now it's worth noting that this password is your password appended with a security token. To find out more information about that, you can find that here in the documentation where it does explain some more details with a link to the Salesforce docs. So bear that in mind. After that, I can then just specify my records in a nice list format underneath, making it quite easy to add multiple records. If we head over to Salesforce now, you'll see that I don't actually have any contacts. So what I'll do is I'll run this workflow that will add 2 contacts. We've got John Doe and Jane Smith. So let's execute this workflow and see these contacts get added to Salesforce. As we can see here, it was successful. If we go to outputs, we can see the IDs of these records. So we can see exactly what they are. So now if I go to Salesforce and refresh the page, we'll see here that we now have our 2 new contacts. Now in this next example, I have the same thing where I'm going to add those 2 records into Salesforce. They are no longer in Salesforce, I have removed them. Afterwards, we're then going to fetch them. So we can then fetch data from Salesforce, use it like a source of truth if we want, to then be able to use that data in other systems and have Kestra be the source that pulls the data from Salesforce and then sends it to other places where you want to use Salesforce as your source of truth. And then you can also then add data back into Salesforce using the update task that I have here. So for example, once we've received the data, we'll then pause so that we can look at it. And then we're going to update each of those contacts so they have the last name Smith. Now at the moment, only one of them will have the last name Smith. But in fact, let's change this again to just the last name of Kestra. So instead, they should both have the same last name of Kestra. And to do this, I'm getting that ID that we got from the output from the first task. So when we create the contacts, it will return an ID for each of the records, and then we can use that ID later on when updating them. This makes it quite easy to be able to make this quite dynamic too. But you can also hard code them too if you know you're always updating the same records. As you can see from the example here on the right hand side, you can actually have multiple records similar to when we created them. Now I've instead opted to use a for each block here to loop through the task, which means I can pass it a different value each time, whereas I'd have to manually write out that expression for each record. So I just thought this was a little bit nicer where I can iterate through it. Useful if you've got maybe loads of records you need to update. And then to go with that, there's also a delete task. Again, quite similar to the update task where you can specify those object IDs to be able to delete them. And here again, I'm just looping through it so I can just pass it. If I end up getting more, it will just automatically deal with that. And to clean this all up, so I haven't got to specify my connection details, I'm using a plugin default here just so that any Salesforce task in this workflow will in fact use the same username and password. Just makes the workflow a little bit tidier. So now when I execute this workflow, what we'll see is it's going to create those contacts for me and then it's going to fetch them. So we can see if I now refresh the page here, we've got 2 contacts inside of Salesforce. Great. I can then also go to the Outputs tab here and see it has in fact fetched those contacts again. So I've got their IDs, all the information to do with them, which is really helpful. Well, one thing I didn't mention is there is the property of fetch type. So you can specify what kind of fetch you want. So by default, it's set to none, but you can set it to store, which I've got, which gives you then an ION file that you can then download and use or preview. I find this a little bit easier for being able to have a quick browse, but you can also set it to fetch, where instead it will just give you everything in outputs as each individual row. So this demo uses the fetch type. So here it gives me each of the rows as an output. So this is really useful if you want to be able to just fetch in bits of information such as the ID for being able to update records, or maybe email if you're trying to check it against a different system. So this might be preferable, but you can also set it to store. And if we just execute that, you'll see that Store will give us that ION file, so useful if you want to download it, maybe upload it to a different destination. Going back to the previous workflow we had where I had it paused, we can see that it has fetched the 2 records we've added to Salesforce, and we can confirm that they are there. Now the next task is going to use that for each block to update the contacts so they have the last name Kestra. So if I now resume this workflow, like so, we'll see now that it's going to update those contacts, and we can now go back to Salesforce and give it a refresh, and we'll see that now they are both called John Kestra and Jane Kestra. So we know that that's working as expected. And again, we can go to the Outputs tab here to see the ID of that update. We can see it again here. Now, the next task is the same, but we're going to delete both of them. So let's now resume that and see it remove both of them from Salesforce. Useful if you need to remove information automatically after it's been used. So now none of those contacts are available. They have both been removed from Salesforce. So hopefully this plugin will enable you to use Salesforce as that source of truth, where you want to be able to pull data out of it, use things like the email address to check it against different systems. For example, in the past, I wanted to be able to store a bunch of users in Salesforce and reference data that I could fetch from a different system and then store some of that data again back into Salesforce. So I can make sure that the user exists. There is in that data set, they are one of my users and not some random thing. I can then add data back to the user in Salesforce and then move on to the next. So lots of opportunities here to run this on a schedule, maybe run this in an event-driven pattern. There's lots of options. So let me know in the comments below how you're using Salesforce and whether this plugin is useful for you.